Please welcome to the front, Mollie Goldstein. And editor Jennifer Lee.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I just want to echo what Joe said at the beginning, that it is such a pleasure to see familiar faces and new faces, and I hope you'll keep joining us for these ACE Presents screenings. I'm so happy to be up here with Jenny Lee, we've been friends for like 20 years?
Yeah,
almost?
It's been a long time.
Yeah, so it's really fun to be up here, just sharing your talent and expertise with this crowd. Jenny and I worked together on a movie called Neal Cassidy in 2006. She was my assistant editor. I have never seen anyone work as hard as she did. She slept across 2 Aeron chairs one night.
It was a long night of making string outs. So
yes, which is not anything we advise or endorse
don't
for those
follow
of
my
you
example.
out there.
And she didn't ask me to do it. I did it, but don't follow me. Don't do that.
So I'm so happy to be up here and talking about this beautiful, delicate, tender movie. I wonder if we could start with the fact that you're both the editor and the producer on this film. So that's unusual. What did that mean on this project, and how did that come about?
I need to give you guys a little bit of backstory and go into my villain origin story, which is film is my second career, and my first career is I was a comic book editor, and I did that for the better part of 10 years. And I worked at the Vertigo imprint of DC Comics, which is the mature readers imprint, and then I later went across the railroad tracks to Marvel, and I edited like Daredevil and Wolverine, Black Widow, and like a bunch of superhero comics. And the comic book editor job, what do they do? First and foremost, comics are a collaborative medium. They are a visual storytelling medium. They're very much like film, a team sport. And a lot of what the editor does, you're working with each of those different artists or writers or talent to get the best work out of them. And all along the way, you are the midwife of the story. You are there to make sure that the story continuity stays on point. You're there to troubleshoot things, and you're there to manage the project and make sure it ships on time if you can, and basically do whatever you can to nurture the talent that you're working with so that you can make that happen. And I remember having this conversation once with a new friend who we were hosting at our house, and she had been a producer at Disney, and she's like, what does a comic book editor do? And I explained it to her, just like I did just now, and she's like, oh, that's producing, you're a producer. And I was like, I didn't know anybody in film. It didn't occur to me to even think of it that way, but that was a skill set that comics are an iterative, they're a serial medium, and so those books have to come out every month in single issues, and you do it over and over and over again. So over the time that I was working, I worked on over a few hundred issues, and I got to see the story get developed and executed and make those decisions quickly. So to me, being a producer was like, bringing a comic book editor approach to this film. But that was only possible because I had this director. He and I were actually working on his first feature, and we had just been through the fire together and learned a lot. It was his first feature, it was my first feature, and he could see that there was a skill set that I had, and that I would, was very determined to figure things out, and I worked really hard. But most importantly, and I know there's a lot of editors here who can really speak to this, is we had this foundation of trust. It's the most important thing. They talk about the director and the editor being like a work marriage, and it can be a very important, intimate, but most importantly, relationship. But it really has to be about knowing that, when you're offering an opinion on something, it's not coming from a place of ego, it's not coming from a place of politics, it is coming from a place of both of you want the same thing to make a really good story, to create a compelling emotional experience. And he and I knew that our tastes were aligned, and so when we were figuring out, we made a good team, and we're like, okay, what's our next project? For me to organically be a producer on the next one made perfect sense to him, and it made perfect sense to me because that's all I did as a comic book editor for so many years. So that's how that happened.
I always think that editors would make great like story producers,
Yeah.
basically. You know, bring us on earlier. We can see problems in storytelling.
We can fix it for you.
Yeah, let us
Before
help
you shoot it.
All we want to do is fix it in the script, so we don't have to fix it in ADR and cleverly reposition shots. So yeah. So what was the development process like? What was it like to develop this script?
Well, you know, Craig and I were, as I said, we were already working on his first feature. It was called True Adolescence, and it starred Mark Duplass, so that's how we knew Mark. And we were actually working on a different script. It was called Alex Strangelove, which was going to be our third project together, ended up being our third project together. And at some point, he pulled out this other script, and he's like, you know, I pulled this out. I haven't looked at it in a few years. I wrote it a few years ago in grad school with my good friend Mark Heyman. And I think there's actually something there. And so he sent it, and I read it, and it was a lot of the DNA and a lot of the elements were there. It was called The Skeleton Twins. Maggie and Milo were in it, but the story was a little bit more weighted towards Rich and Milo, actually. And part of that is because Mark Heyman had grown up in New Mexico, and there actually was a scandal in his high school where there was a student who had an affair with this young teacher, and so that was sort of the kernel that they started with when they were making this film, when they decided they were going to write it. You know, when I read it, like a lot of other people at that time, when we, you know, the other producers, we really responded to the sibling relationship. You know, it was really clear this is a non-romantic love story. You have to be really rooting for them to be together at the end. And I couldn't relate to a student having an affair with a teacher, but I could definitely relate to being a sister, you know, and that relationship felt so universal. If you think about it, like your siblings are like your first allies and like they're your first enemies, and they know all the shortcuts, how to like get under your skin. And so there were we were like, let's develop that more. And, you know, at the time I was I was the only woman on that team, on that little creative team. And I was in my mid-30s. This was my second career, as I mentioned. And, you know, I still remember we had this big story session like at my apartment in Fort Greene. And we were like, how do we, you know, it was really about how do we, plus the Maggie storyline, at the time, most of her malaise came from being like sort of this unsatisfied housewife, but there were, you know, some elements that felt like we could really boost up. And I remember I was secretly questioning, should I have a kid? You know, what is that going to mean? And if there are any freelancers here in the room, you know that like to be a freelancer is to like kind of live in constant paranoia that like I'm never going to work again, or if you don't book a job, then you're like,
then
why
it's
didn't
all
I get
over.
that job? Why didn't I get that job? What do they know? It's so easy to like go spiral down that hole. And so I wasn't telling anybody that I was like, oh, should I have a kid? What's it going to mean? Can I still keep working? Like all of those things. And I remember being at the story session and we're like, what are we going to do about Maggie? And I remember, you know, my heart was like pounding in my ears and I was like trying to be so casual and be like, I don't know, like maybe Maggie's thinks she maybe should have a baby. Maybe she's not sure, you know, and I don't know. Maybe she's afraid she can't edit the film anymore, you know. But so you know, that was sort of some of sort of personally what I brought to that. And you know, fast forward 3 years, and the film had gone through a really classic indie roller coaster. The financing came together, the financing fell apart, we attached some cast, the cast fell off, and by the time we actually were going and we were locked and we were going, the week one of production was happening during my due date. And so day one, we shot at the community bookstore in Park Slope, and we shot the scene, Ty Burrell's first scenes, you know, in the bookstore, and he's selling a book to a very short, very pregnant Asian lady that was stuck in there by our wonderful first AD, Joe Ciccarella, because we didn't have a budget for a lot of extras. So he stuck all the producers in the film. And, you know, I remember being in the edit and like, repoing, like repositioning the frame to accommodate the height differential, because Ty Burrell's up here and I'm down here, and I'm like, I have to get my belly into the shot. Like, I was like, one day I'm gonna show this to my kid. And being a new mom, because I worked on the film. Like, I was assembling the film, 5 weeks after I gave birth, and so I was like, one day I'm gonna show this to my kid, and I'm gonna point at my belly, and I'm gonna tell him, like, you're in the movie. And you know what? That day is today, because my kid is here. And I get to say, Parker, sweetheart, you were in the film. So, yeah. And, and one other thing I'll say about being able to do something, like, the running joke was, I was having twins, I was having the movie, and, and I was like, instead of decorating a nursery, it was like just waddling to Tech Scouts. And, it's only possible because you have other producers who are supporting you. It's possible because you have an amazing husband who's going to be, my husband is a comic book artist and a writer, Cliff Chang, and he was understood that I was producing the movie so that I could edit it, and he understood how much it meant to me to do it. So, the fact that my water broke on set during rap drinks, like, he was okay with that to some degree, because of course I was going to keep her, like, there was no question, and he understood that. And you have a nanny. I had my mom helping me out, but most importantly, I had somebody in my corner, and that was my director, Craig. And this is maybe a little TMI, but I had like breast milk supply issues. I had to pump every 3 hours, and I was working, and then my alarm would go off, and I'd be like, I'll be right back, and then would put on a pumping bra and like a cardigan and like a nursing cover, which Craig called my boob smock, and a breast pump is not a quiet machine. It's not a quiet piece of machinery, but like I was covered up, and I was like, let's keep working. And, he would just be like, oh, just, turn it up a little because I can't hear. But, and he was super understanding about it. And I was really lucky that that's how I was able to do that.
And how was it? Having a newborn and making a movie are two really emotional experiences that really pull a lot out of you and really draw from the kind of the essence of who you are. How was it doing two of those at once?
Really hard. But you can do hard things, right? Like, that's this, and I'm not gonna say like, oh, I wouldn't, I wish it were no other way, like, because it was hard, but it was doable, and we still had a good result, and it meant so much to me to keep working on the movie. It just was really important. And I was lucky enough to have people around me who believed and gave me the benefit of the doubt. But watching it today, I was completely like PTSD, like watching it, I was like, oh my God, like, and I haven't seen this movie in so many years. And so that was really emotional, and it was really gratifying to see it with an audience. Man, thank you all so much for being here so we could hear you guys react to it. That was super cool.
Well, and I just want to say, as your friend up here with you, like, I really love that you are willing to talk about A, how hard it was, and B, how great it was too.
Yeah.
Because we're as artists, as humans, as a parent, you have to juggle all of these sides of yourself, and sometimes it's hard.
Sometimes it's hard.
And you just hope that it's worth it, and that you do all the things that you're doing the best that you can. And I'm just really glad that you're here talking about it and being open about it. And
thanks.
Yeah, she deserves that. I want to switch gears a little bit. This movie, as I recall, was Bill Hader's kind of breakout role. Before this, he was the guy on SNL. I remember I came to an early feedback screening and was like, holy shit, like, this SNL guy can act. So from the producer side, from the editor side, can you talk about casting him? Can you talk about seeing the dailies? Let's talk about the Bill Hader of this movie.
The Bill Hader. Well, when you're casting, everybody on the team will put together their wish list of people. Bill was actually on my list, but everybody was like, oh, okay. But he showed up we had this amazing casting director, Avi Kaufman, who works with Spielberg, and she's a legend. And Bill was on her list, and I remember when I saw that, I was like, aha. And we were like, tell us about Bill Hader. And she's like, he asked to show up to some table reads. And I saw him in a table read with Kate Winslet and Paul Dano. And he was one of the best in the room. And that was that was like, okay. And we were really excited by the idea of showing people a side of Bill that people hadn't at that point hadn't seen before. We had to meet him in person just to make sure. Obviously, you want to like make sure there's a temperament and there's a chemistry match and a vibe check. He was on SNL, so his schedule was so hard. And the only day he was available to meet was double booked against my post-elopement drinks at a bar. Like my husband and I like went to City Hall, and then we're like, let's throw a little bar party, and we scheduled it. And so I moved him to the dive bar next door, and like showed up at the dive bar and like in my cocktail dress while like my wedding party is happening like next door, and it was like, hi, nice to meet you. We like chatted a little bit, and then I went over. But meanwhile Cliff was dealing with everybody's like, where's Jenny? And he's like, oh, she's like at the bar next door with Bill Hader. It was really weird. He's like, she's got this movie going on. Sorry, I remember after Craig was done meeting with Bill and like him coming in, and he was like glowing. He's like, and we were all like, that's Milo. We just knew as soon as we met him, we're like, that's totally Milo. And he was game for it. And so we made it happen.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary performance. And I've heard him, I actually heard an interview with him recently where he talks about how Barry came directly out of the opportunities from Skeleton Twins. HBO saw him in Skeleton Twins and was basically like, what else do you want to do? We want to make a thing with you. And it led directly to Barry. So has he sent you a check yet?
No, he has not. But it's funny. This business always wants to like pigeonhole you, and nobody ever wants to be the one to give you your first thing. Mm-hmm. Like getting your first feature is so hard, and after that, everybody's like, "Oh, someone else took a risk on you, so it's okay." Yeah. And it's I think the same with casting. It's the same with so many of these. So many of the roles are just so segmented, and so it's hard to break out.
Well, and it's one of the things I love about indie film, actually, is like the opportunity to put somebody like Bill Hader in this part, and I find that so exciting in movies I'm working on. It's like the best thing for me is seeing an actor in something they've never done before, and being able to be like, look at this talent, look at this person.
Yeah.
Editing-wise, this movie is so dependent on these slow character reveals. Kind of the revelation of the details of this backstory between Milo and Rich, the kind of your evolving understanding of Maggie and how her relationship with Luke Wilson and her relationship to getting pregnant. And I just know as an editor that when you have a movie that this is this delicately balanced, that happened in post. You can do your best on the script, but once you see it in real time with real actors, it becomes something different. So what was that process like of teasing out the story, and do you remember anything that you had to kind of bring up or that went by the wayside?
What I will say is this is where the fact that I was on it so early, giving notes on the script and helping shape it early on, was really helping me troubleshoot for the edit, and being able to weigh in on all the really major creative decisions, like from casting Bill Hader and Kristen Wiig and pushing story. I remember there was a time where there was always a fight outside between Maggie and Milo, and the thing that she said that she couldn't take back was like never mean enough. And it was, so it was like, I'm sorry, it needs to be meaner. Like it's not quite there yet to really buy that it's going to drive them apart and she's going to want to kill herself. And so it was a little bit of this like loving push, and I just remember there was this one draft that came in that had really jumped forward so far, and that line was in there. And I remember at our Sundance screening, people gasped when she said, "Well, maybe you should cut deeper." And even here, people are like, "Ooh," So I'm like, "Oh, it still lands." So a lot of the tones, the tonal shifts, the changes, the humor, the character stuff, that was all really baked in. And if you look at our continuity, and a continuity is just sort of like a map of the film with all the scenes listed and the numbers of the scenes and a little description of what happens in each scene. Like there isn't that much moving around, but there is a section at the bottom that you typically put in with deleted scenes, and there are 27 deleted scenes. And some of those were repurposed as other pieces, and a lot of those were like little expositional things. But a really big thing that we had to nail, and everybody who edits features knows, like, you spend so much time on the opening and the first 10 minutes and 15 minutes, and you spend a lot of time on the ending. So that voiceover where she's like, talking in the beginning, that wasn't there. There was like some footage of the kid. Like, there was definitely some restructuring around the opening. And what we found is, because Maggie's struggles is about secrecy, it's about suppression, it is about pretending that she's fine, and because, like, Milo, that reveal is such a big deal. It is so inherently, the stakes are so high. Having to make sure that people stayed connected with her was just really important. And so we brought in the voiceover early on, which connects to sort of her, like, sort of suicide voicemail at the end, see you later. But that was something that it took, it was like we were editing for at least 3 months before we're like, okay. And I think it was Mark Duplass who was like, now you guys got to bring in the big guns. VO, who gave us that note, and we're like, okay, okay, fine, and now we're going to work on the VO. And that we were working on that sort of down to the very end. But one unexpected thing, and we had like maybe 4 or 5 friends and family screenings in the process of, like, seeing what's working, what's not working, where the consensus is, where the notes are, where the note underneath the note is. And one thing that was sort of unexpected, again, we were like making sure people felt very sympathetic to what Maggie was going through, was, you cast, the dad from Modern Family, and which was very intentional. We're like, we need someone who radiates decency, who you're not going to be like, ugh. And I'll never forget somebody watching an earlier cut of it, he was like, I don't know, maybe she's overreacting. Like, in that bar fight, like, he seems like a pretty good guy. Like, why is she so angry? And you're just like, oh my God. Like, so that was another reason we were like, okay, let's really make sure people are very connected to Maggie, because, like, there's always something that happens in one of those friends and family screenings that you are not expecting. You know how the script is, you know what the intention is, and there's always something you're like, holy shit, like, okay, now we got to work on that. So that was something that really came up.
I always try to warn directors that, and unless you've been through it, you never know. There is always something completely out of left field that you're like, I can't believe in all the time I've spent with this movie, I've never seen that coming.
Yes.
And now I have a story problem I have to fix.
Yeah, that you just were not expecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to open up to questions, but before we do, we have to talk about Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, which is such a showstopper of a scene. It is so fantastic. I know Vulture is obsessed with this scene. This is a scene that has a legacy, that has survived. And watching it tonight, I gives me goosebumps. It's so good. So what can you tell us about that?
What I can tell you is the first version of the script that I read, it was a song called Don't Cry Out Loud by Melissa Manchester, and there was always a scene, it was like a torch song, and there was always a scene where he's trying to charm her off the couch. But later it changed to the song Hold On by Wilson Phillips, because the idea was that it had to be a little cheesy, but rock out a little bit and be a little uplifting, because he was trying to get her in a better mood. And in 2011, I was at South by Southwest with another film, and the secret midnight screening was Bridesmaids. It hadn't come out yet. And it was like at the Paramount Theater, it was like midnight, and I'm watching it, and that scene comes on where they're singing Hold On at the end, and like the whole theater is like super into it, and like I am like full like Hitchcock dolly zoom, like, oh no. And like the second the movie was over, I like whip out my phone, and Craig's in LA, so I know he's still up, and I'm like, we have to change the song. And the song stayed Hold On like through most of prep, and we'd be like in the van, we'd be like, how's that song coming along, Craig? And he's like, yeah, I was like, auditioning other songs like with a hairbrush in the mirror, but I haven't found it yet. And I looked at it, it was in the blue draft of the script.
Oh, wow.
And it was, which is like the second like shooting draft, and it was we only put that song in like in the script and specified it like a week or two before we started shooting, and then I had to clear it and make it happen. But it was always, and that song, the key of that song, right, is that it's a duet. There's a Grace Slick part, so he gets to not only pull her out of her mood, but get her to sing and participate, and it's so much more active. And Craig did such a lovely job of blocking it, like, okay, you're gonna do the piano thing here, and here's where you go on the ottoman, and now like Lance comes in, that all cutting it together. The blocking was very specific, so it was really about like picking the right takes to make that happen. But there was a lot of fine tuning around the sort of how much do you telegraph? Like, how hard a time is she going to give him before she decides she's gonna get in there? Does it feel joyful and euphoric? And when she does finally give in, like, how do we just sort of plus those moments? So a lot of that was like the fine cutting of that.
It's just a joy.
Thanks.
Questions from the audience. I think we have microphones floating around. I can't see any of you past these lights, so we're gonna trust our Metrograph staff to.
Hi. I wanted to follow up about what you just said about that shocking remark about Rich and Milo, because the tone of this film is so delicate, and often it seems that the difference between something really weighty and something comic can be just in the way, like the timing of like one cut. So when you know that people are going to have reactions that you don't expect and that you can't sort of micromanage everybody's reaction to everything, how do you know for yourself when you have struck the right tone of a scene?
Some of it's just about screening it with enough different people and getting like a different range of, and asking people, having a lot of follow-up conversations. And some of it is just also having faith in that. Early on in the screening process with friends and family, like there's a lot of consensus and a lot of people have the same issues. And then then some people are like, I like that scene. And other people are like, I didn't like that scene. And then you're like, it's just a movie.
Totally. That's exactly right.
That's what movies are.
Yeah.
And, so some of that is just sort of listening to that tuning fork in you and be like, it feels right to me, it feels right to you, the director, and having faith that, and knowing that it's going to land for some people and it's not going to land for others, and that's fine, So you just have to like commit and hope to God it's gonna do well and it's gonna land with more people than not. I feel like if you're at 51%, at least it's weighted in the correct direction. But you don't always know, and it's like that's what's so hard about the movie. You can only do the best job you possibly can, and after that, like the movie goes out into the world and it has its own life, and you can't control how people are going to respond to it. But that's the circuit that gets completed with art. Is the audience sees that they respond, and it just takes on a life of its own. Thanks.
What else?
We've got time for one more question.
All right, we'll take one more question.
Hi. I'm glad you talked about the Starship song, because literally as the movie started and they had that Blondie song, I was thinking about the music and the songs. Obviously you have Randall Poster, who's a genius. But were there any songs you were cutting to that you couldn't use and had to replace later? Can you talk about that, the cutting to the music in those scenes?
We had a lot of expensive music in this film that was hard to pay for. And the Blondie, the Denis, that one of Randy's, like that was an early get from him, and he was like, we're gonna do Blondie's version of Denis, and then actually in a bar when Milo pulls out the little whale, you hear the original version of that song too. So it was meant to be a callback to that. I think even, and this is very common, like even in the mix, the music supervisor is like sending you some alts, like here's some cheaper alts, so that we could pay for the OMD, but like maybe we take out this song and here's a baby band, it's gonna be cheaper, here's a blanket deal with this, music service. So it was really down to the wire, as it often is in the mix, to make that happen. What I will say is that, when The Social Network came out, everybody was obsessed with that score because it's such a good score, and so many people were using it for temp. And so when I was cutting this movie, I'm gonna go back to this other like Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross, like Ghost album that's all instrumental, and I'm gonna use that to temp a lot of and like everybody hated it. All the producers were like, this is a bummer. This song is like really slow, and then years later, like Lil Nas X has like Old Town Road come out, and that plucking sample is from that album. I was like, I have good taste. But yeah. But I just want to shout out Nathan Larson is sort of our composer. Mm-hmm. Has this. I've been gatekeeping that score for so long. It's so good, and it really is. I feel like the secret weapon to really make you like sit and cry at the end is hearing that score, hearing the rise of it. Just the warmth of that score is really incredible. So we were really lucky to have such an amazing composer.
Yeah, you had some. I know we're out of time. We didn't even talk about Reed Moreno, who shot the film. who is also another genius that
Yeah.
you got
Reed is great.
early in her career here.
It was one of the last films before she started directing and doing *Handmaid's Tale*. It was like one of the last films she did that she was like lensing that she didn't actually, I think, direct. So we were lucky to get her. And she was prepping Meadowland. I remember her sitting in the production office and being like, "Yeah, I've got this other script I'm going to be, directing soon." And we had, it's not a surprise that that she's had the career takeoff that she's had, because she's great.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jenny. Thank you, Metrograph.